What's up everybody, and welcome back to another video here on the Simply Car Things YouTube channel. Now this has been a hotly anticipated car review for my channel specifically because I produce so much M4 content. I own a BMW F82 M4, and here we are sitting in a 2021 G82 BMW M4 equipped with a 6-speed manual. This is pretty much, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant specifications you can get a G8X M car in, being black sapphire metallic over the Fiona red interior with all the carbon exterior bits, and of course the icing on the cake being that lovely 6-speed manual transmission. Now this car, the G8X, I mean, there's so much to talk about with this platform, and it has easily been regarded as one of the most controversial BMW M models in recent years, and that's mainly due to the exterior design of this car, specifically that front fascia with those massive kidney grills. Now here's the thing guys, design is completely subjective, and if you want to know my opinion, in the beginning I was highly against the design of this car, did not like it, was not keen to it. And to be quite honest, a lot of that feeling still remains towards this car. However, I will say, when you look at an example such as this G82 in specific, specced out all black or perhaps in darker colors with carbon accents, lowered tastefully with wheel spacers to really bring an aggressive stance, it looks tremendously better than a stock one, specifically in a bright color. I think darker colors truly help to disguise the pig snout, if you will. That's kind of a derogatory term used towards this car, but it really does help to blend the overall design and just make everything look a little bit more proportional. So in terms of design, that is my opinion. There you guys have it. While I personally am a little bit biased towards the F82, and I still think the F82 is peak M4 design, this is definitely a great looking car. Now, in terms of modifications, this car is relatively stock. The only thing it has done to it is just a set of wheel spacers. So we have 17mm spacers up front, 15mm in the rear, and we are also lowered on a set of H&R Sport springs. That is it. Stock alignment settings, stock factory Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires, 285s in the rear and a 275 up front with the staggered wheel setup. And of course, everything is tied together with that combination of the S58 twin turbo inline 6 engine, putting out around 475 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque, paired with that 6-speed manual transmission. And let me tell you guys, it is a very, very nice combo. This thing gets up. It is very quick, it is very potent, and compared to something like the BMW S55 engine, which was the previous twin turbo inline 6 unit that was featured in the previous F8X M3 and M4, this thing gets up. I'm not even going to say what speed that was. One thing immediately that I have to admit that is so superior about this car to the F8X platform is the power delivery and the engine tuning of the S58. This engine feels so much more linear. It has a very buttery smooth power band, and you feel a progressive buildup all the way to redline, as opposed to the S55, which just hit you with an instant wave of torque that was overwhelming to the rear end of the car. You're always fighting traction in the F80s, whereas in this thing, it's very smooth and it actually feels predictable. You don't feel nearly as intimidated driving this G82 as compared to something like an F82. The suspension tuning as well is phenomenal. This car is equipped with the factory EDC electronic dampers that can be adjusted on the fly, and paired with these H&R Sport springs, you have very compliant suspension damping, and it's not overly damped. That's one thing that I was actually just talking about to the owner of this car, is that it's not overly stiff. You know, it's actually a pretty plush ride for the most part, even in the Sport Plus chassis setting, but that's all you really need. And the car just handles so well. And this engine pulls quite ferociously, I gotta admit. It really just feels like an S55 with a more linear power band, and just a power band that is easier to utilize. You can really extract quite a bit out of it, and again, you just don't feel intimidated to drive this thing, which I really like. Steering feel, on the other hand, I would say is lacking, as with a lot of these newer M vehicles. Of course, given the fact that this does use an electronic steering rack unit, you don't get a ton of feedback through it. I would say that the different steering modes are nowhere near as artificial feeling as in the F80. Like if you put the F80 into Sport Plus steering, for example, it just felt so like overly heavy, and it was just heavy for the sake of being heavy, which really didn't make any sense. This feels a lot more natural in that sense, but in terms of like feedback from the undulations and variances in the road surface that you're driving over, you're still not getting a ton through the wheel. Now, does that mean the steering is bad? No, it does not. The steering is very direct. You just point the steering wheel in the direction that you want the car to turn, and the car complies pretty much instantly. The steering itself is very sharp, and really that is the most important thing in my opinion when it comes to the steering of any sort of performance car. Now let's move into this manual transmission. I have had the opportunity to drive a G80 M3 competition with the ZF8, and I have to admit, guys, I'm just not a fan of that transmission. The torque converter is good for a daily driving scenario. It does shift pretty fast, but in terms of just engagement and the driver appeal behind that transmission and that gearbox, it's just not really all there. The shifts are nowhere near as ferocious as what you would get with the DCT. You don't get that really crispy snap on every upshift. You get this kind of like blurp instead. And there is somewhat of a delay with the paddle shifters on that gearbox, which is a bit unfortunate because, you know, when you're talking about a high-end performance car, especially from BMW's M division, you want something that's responsive, something that is going to react to every single input that you give it. Now, this 6-speed manual, on the other hand, is pretty much a direct carryover mechanically from the F8X. And revisiting it in this car, it is really, really great that BMW decided to bring it into this generation. I must admit that the shifter itself may not feel the crispiest. It has a little bit of like a rubbery feel to it, which, you know, is a tad like synthetic in terms of the driving feel, but that's just being nitpicky. The fact that you have 3 pedals and you have a 6-speed manual to just row through the gears on your own command is truly what is brilliant. This car also has the auto rev match assistant, which works phenomenally. There are no hiccups with it. It is very smooth. And for someone that's new to manual, or if you let somebody else drive the car that isn't super familiar with a manual gearbox, this is something that is very nice. Now, I know the F80 also had the rev match feature, but, you know, to have it here again, it's nice. And oh yeah, this car just takes these turns with ease. So much power from this twin turbo inline 6. It definitely feels more than 475 horsepower. I'd say this is easily over 500 horsepower. And those downshifts, guys, oh, so satisfying. Unfortunately, while I was in the middle of filming the driving portion of the review of this 2021 BMW M4, the batteries on my camera decided to take a dump on me and my camera died. Which was a tad frustrating, to say the least, because there was a lot that I really wanted to cover that I wasn't able to do so while I was sitting behind the wheel of the G82. However, nonetheless, I wanted to take just a few minutes to go ahead and wrap up my thoughts, as well as share a couple of other statements in regards to the G8X platform as a whole, now that I've had the opportunity to thoroughly drive one, as well as provide a review for you guys on the channel. I think the biggest takeaway of this new platform and this new generation of BMW M is that it is truly a refinement of everything that the F80 sort of lacked, or every flaw that the F80 had. So the biggest thing that I have personally noticed when I was driving the car was the ability to put the power down. The S58 engine being so smooth, the way that the engine tuning and engine response is delivered. I think out of the entire time that I was driving the car, I had MDM on. I only saw the MDM light flash once, and that was when I floored it in first gear, basically from a dead standstill. It wanted to break the tires loose. But aside from that, this car does not hiccup in terms of its ability to put the power down. It's really impressive how much more effective the power delivery is to the ground with the G8X. And as I touched on in my review, it's really confidence inspiring because you have a car that feels very controllable. it's a car that also does not feel intimidating because of the fact that the rear end always wants to break out on you. It is much more stable and it feels much more planted as a result of that. I've also noticed that BMW has implemented some different engine tuning. So with the S55, you get immense amounts of torque early on, and you can easily light the rear tires up very fast if you just floor the accelerator. However, with the G82 is a little different. It almost feels like the car locks you out of full boost until you hit a certain point within the RPM band. And I think that tuning is integrated on purpose for the sake of effective power delivery. So when you floor the car from maybe like 25 to 2700 RPM in second gear, for example, there isn't a ton of response until you hit maybe around 4500 to 5000 RPM, where the car really starts to pick up and you can feel the boost coming in at full force. And that brings me into the point of, is this a more fun car to drive? And it depends on how you look at it. This car is definitely not as brash as an F80. It's definitely not as raw feeling, quote unquote. It's more smooth, it's more refined, and maybe one could argue as a result of that, the car lacks a little bit of excitement behind the wheel. But the trade-off, or what you get in return from that, is a much cleaner driving experience. A car that feels a lot better set up out of the box, and a car that feels a lot more capable out of the box. And I can only even imagine what a proper alignment, R-comp tires, and some even better suspension would do to a car like that. I mean, I'm sure it would handle amazing. And let's also not discredit the power of the S58 engine, which is absurd. The car for sure makes more than 473 horsepower, which is what the factory rating is from BMW. Although this car does have a significantly higher curb weight, it weighs like 200 to 250 pounds more than an equally spec'd F80. It doesn't feel any heavier than an F82. A lot of the chassis bracing elements, a lot of the strut tower bracing, and a lot of the torsional rigidity that was implemented into this new chassis really helps to not only disguise the relatively high curb weight of the car, but also give it much better driving dynamics and a better handling feel overall. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on is the interior of this M4. The interior is overall a pretty large step up and a step in the right direction for BMW. The premium feeling materials, this example being spec'd with the extended leather option on the dashboard and the door cards, the high quality buttons, carbon fiber interior trim pieces. Overall, it's a very premium feeling cabin, and that is definitely something that is appreciated when you're spending $80,000 to $90,000 on a sports car. And I think with this example specifically, if it was optioned with those lovely M carbon bucket seats, it would be a 10 out of 10. So with that being said, overall the G82 is a fantastic driver's car. It's fast, it handles great, and it is a proper refinement, really fixing a lot of the flaws that the F80 was dogged for to a certain degree. Now maybe that comes with the trade-off of a little bit of a duller driving experience, and perhaps also if you don't like the looks of the car from the exterior, that might be something to consider as well. But if those two things don't matter to you, then this is a very worthy upgrade from the previous generation, or if you're looking to get into your first BMW M, this car might just be the one for you. With all that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching this review. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you go ahead and smash the thumbs up button as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel down below, I would appreciate that immensely. And I will catch you all in the next one. Take it easy, my friends. Bye-bye.